Hi, and welcome back. Yeah, I've got an interesting story to tell you all, so I thought I might just mow some lawns, a job I always enjoy doing, and chat as we may. So, today I want to tell you all the story about uh, um, how my wife became a Christian, and there's a bit of a neat story behind that. So, the story starts off probably like many others, but there's a bit of a twist to it. So, listen up and I'll tell you. So anyway, I'll explain how she became Christian first, and then sort of the story comes from that. So she wasn't brought up as a Christian. Her parents weren't Christian or anything, although they both are now. Um, and so what happened is one day she'd go down to the hospital because she had a problem, and she was in the waiting room at the hospital. She was on her own because this was years before I ever met her, and she was extremely nervous. And this guy comes up to her, and this guy had arrived at the hospital waiting room with a teenage boy in tow, and he came up to her and he said, "Look, this is going to sound really weird, but would you mind if I prayed for you?" Because she was looking rather nervous and she was on her own, and my wife, who'd sort of never come across anything like this before, said, yeah, no, that'd be fine. That's okay. So he prayed for her, and then he talked to her a bit, and he explained that the reason that he was at the hospital there is that he was at a camp, and what had happened, what have I done there? One of the boys at the camp had hurt themselves, so he'd brought this boy down to the hospital, and that's why he was there. And so anyway, and this guy, he said his name was Steve, and he explained that he went to this particular church, and if she would like to, then she could come along to that church and she'd be most welcome. So my wife she got seen by the doctor, and everything turned out to be okay, so that was good. She went home, and during the following week she mentioned to her mum about how this guy had offered to pray for her at the hospital, and how she'd felt some sense of relief after that had happened, and he'd invited her to go to his church. And my wife, Nikki, her mum says, actually, I wouldn't mind trying church just to see what it's all like, but that church seems like an awfully long way away from where we live. There's this other one that's closer, why don't we try that? So Nikki said, yes, let's do that. So her mum and her went along to this church that was sort of more local the following Sunday, and they started going there regularly, and both ended up giving their lives to Christ as a result of that. But because they never went back to that church, because they'd never gone to that church that the guy went to, they'd never ever seen him ever since, and he'd obviously known nothing about any of this. So then we fast forward about 7 years on from that point, and in the meantime my wife and I have met, and we've gotten married, and we're raising a family together. And so this part of the story now, it takes place about 7 years ago. Okay? What happens is my wife and I are at our local church that we go to together, and the pastor gives this message, and he talks about how often we're a link in the chain. Something we do is a link in the chain, but unless we're a link towards the end of the chain, we might never ever know about what the result of our actions ever was. And he used as an example, he said, think back to when you became a Christian, who the people were that were instrumental in you becoming a Christian. He said, do those people know that they were instrumental in that? Even if it was your parents, okay, let's say you're a second or third generation Christian, and your parents or grandparents are the ones that introduced you to God. Even then, they may not know how instrumental they were in that. So the pastor challenged us all that perhaps we should get hold of the people that were really instrumental enough to becoming Christians, if they don't already know, and tell them about what had happened, about the great thing that what they did had done in their lives. And my wife and I went home from that, and my wife said to me, the problem with that is I'd have no idea how to get hold of this guy. All I remember is that his first name, I think, was Steve. I'm not certain. And he went along to this particular church, and I recall him mentioning he had 2 sons, I think. And I don't know, I would have put him at mid-30s probably. And that's all I know about him. So I said, well, I don't know, let's see if we can find out who he is from that. So I looked up Google, and yes, sometimes the internet can actually be really, really good. And I found this church. They had a web page, and I found an email address for the pastor of that church. So we sent an email to this pastor of the church. In the email we said, look, about 7 years ago, my wife had an encounter with someone from your church who we think his name is Steve, but we're not absolutely certain. He was probably in about his mid-30s, and he had 2 sons, I think. He could have other children as well, but we're pretty sure he had 2 sons, and he was helping to run a youth camp. So we understand this is very, very vague, but would you by any chance have any idea who this person might be? And if you do, any idea how we might be able to get hold of him by any chance? And the pastor emailed us back. He said, I think I do know who you're talking about. And if it's who I think it is, then yes, you're right, his name is Steve, and he has got a couple of sons, and he still attends our church and is a regular member. Why is that sort of thing? So we emailed the pastor back, and we explained about the sermon at our church, and we said, look, so what we'd really like to do is just, tell this guy Steve. So could we perhaps send you an email? We're not asking you to give up privacy information or anything. We're going to send you an email. You can read it by all means. If you're happy with the email, could you pass it on to this guy Steve for us? The pastor said, by all means, we could. I'd do that for you, absolutely. So my wife writes this email, and it explains how, Steve, you probably don't even remember, but about 7 years ago, you were at a youth camp, and one of the boys at the camp had hurt themselves, and you came down to the hospital with this boy, and while you were there, you actually came up to me and asked if you could pray for me. And I was very, very nervous at the time and scared, and no one had ever offered to pray for me for anything before. I basically knew nothing about God. And at the end of you praying for me, you invited me to your church. Well, I didn't go to your church because, I spoke to my mum, and we decided to try a different church instead, even though we'd sort of never been to church before. But to cut a long story short, Steve, we became Christians. My mother did, I did. I'm raising my children as Christians now. I've gotten married. My husband and I are both raising our families as Christian. So what you did that day, a result of that, and unfortunately you probably never knew this before, but the result is that 3 generations of my family at least are Christians as a result of your faithfulness and what you did. And anyway, this guy Steve, he emailed my wife back. I'm going to read you his response because it's quite neat. It says, it's Steve here, that chap you met in Wellington Hospital a few years back. Thank you so much for the email you sent Pete. Pete was the pastor of the church. For someone who isn't usually as bold as I was on that evening at hospital, it's so encouraging to see God honouring our steps of faith. I can't remember if I told you that evening, but I was pretty miffed at having spent the last night of our youth camp in hospital. I'd managed to get through the week without injuring any kids, and I'd officially finished my activities for the camp and was looking forward to chilling for the evening. There was also an amazing sense of expectation of what the Holy Spirit was going to do at the final meeting that night, as every evening up to then had just been getting better and better with many kids committing their lives to God. So when one of the boys dislocated his shoulder, I groaned inwardly when I knew I'd been missing out. On the journey down from Kapiti, though, I gave myself a talking to and decided I was going to have an awesome evening anyway, and who knows, I might still get to see God in action. To be honest, Nikki, I can't remember what we prayed for, I do remember that I felt strongly compelled to pray with you, even though I was way outside my comfort zone. I left the hospital on a real high that evening. For some reason, our encounter had made the trip down worthwhile for me. Oh yeah, and the lad got his shoulder fixed, but that almost seemed incidental to me. I was smiling inside. So imagine how happy I am now to hear your testimony. I'm not just smiling inside now, you've put a massive smile on my face and pretty much blown me away. Despite what you might have thought about me that evening, I'm not a super spiritual guy. I'm just an ordinary bloke who sometimes struggles with his faith. Thanks for your kind words about my age. I would have actually been in my early 40s back then, and my boys are now 16 and 13. My wife and the boys and I still go to the same church amongst a great church family. This year, as a church, we've really been encouraging everyone to step out in faith, and every week we have testimonies of prayers, prophecies and healings. I haven't shared anything yet, but I'm going to this week, and Pete the pastor wanted to share your email too. So thanks again for making contact. That's a huge encouragement to me, and I'm sure it will be to others too. So that just absolutely blew me away, but the thing that I thought was most important about that is the fact that unless we are the last link in the chain, we often don't know when something we say or something we do has actually had a really, really positive outcome. And we can easily go our whole lives never ever knowing about that outcome that happened. So, first of all, I'd like to really, really encourage anyone that's watching this video that if the person who, or people that were instrumental in you becoming a Christian aren't aware of that, consider getting hold of them, doing everything you can to try and get hold of them and telling them. As I said, even if it's your parents or something, have you ever actually thanked your parents for raising you in their faith so that you've got that faith now? So I really, really encourage you to do that, because it will be extremely encouraging to them, because they probably quite often haven't seen or haven't known the results that their actions have had. And secondly, and this isn't a plug for me to get likes on this video or anything like that, not at all, but I do encourage you to encourage other people regularly. If perhaps you're at church and the pastor gives a sermon that's a really, really good one, actually stop and thank him afterwards and explain that you thought that was one of his better sermons, a really good one, and explain why. Or, take the time to add a comment to someone else's video and just tell them, hey, great job, I really love what you talked about, or something. Just really try and being an encouraging influence in this world, because it just seems that so many people nowadays are very, very negative about things. You read in the newspapers protests about this and protests about that, and it just seems that the whole world is going down a very negative turn. So I'd really, really encourage you all to look on the bright side and try and be an encouragement to other people. So that's probably all I wanted to discuss with you in this video. I have got one other really amazing story that I could tell you, which also involves my wife. About 4 years ago now, we bought a new house, so we sold our old one and bought a new one. Now, we got a real estate agent from the local company to come in and give us a valuation on the old house, and he looked around and he said, look, I think this house is probably going to reach somewhere in the high threes, maybe 380,000, maybe 390,000. If you're really, really lucky, you might get in the very low fours, somewhere up to 410,000. But I don't want you to get your hopes up. I think realistically it's going to be the high threes. Now, we'd already done our maths, and we knew that if we got 380,000 or more for the old house, that we could afford to buy the new one. So we decided that, yep, we would go ahead and we'd put it on the market. And we listed it with this agent. Now, the way it was listed is everyone had to put their bids in, and we'd receive all the bids at the same time. I can't remember what they call that kind of auction, because I'm not a real estate agent. But yeah, everyone puts in a blind bid, They don't know what other people might have bid, and then we're presented with all the offers at once. So the week before the offers closed on the house, my wife said to me, "Look, I really feel quite strongly that God's telling me we're going to get $435,000 for our house." And I'm like, well, that's way more than the agent said would even be possible. I mean, the agent said maybe up to 410 on a really good day, but more than likely something beginning with a 3. So I've got to admit that, I mean, I've been a Christian longer than my wife, but I had my doubts about this. I sort of thought, yeah, I don't know. But, I'm not going to argue the point. So I said, okay, well, let's just write that down and see what happens. So I've got this notebook thing on my phone, on my cell phone, so you can write notes on there, and it automatically dates the notes as to what date you wrote them. So I wrote down on my phone, the offer we accept for our house is $435,000. And it showed a date there. So a week later, the agent arranged to come and present all the offers to us. And he said to us, look, this is my absolute favourite part of my job, is telling the stories behind the people here. So I'm a real people person. So with each offer, he told us a story behind the offer, like, this is a family that wants to buy it to live in, and it will be their first home, or they're buying it for their adult children. And, well, this person's buying it to do the house up. Now, my wife had to do it up and sell it for a profit. Now, my wife and I had already discussed it, and we'd already agreed that if, like, for example, the highest offer was someone who was wanting to buy it to flip and make some money on, and the second highest offer was a family wanting to buy it to live in, and there was only a few $1,000s between them, that we would actually turn down the highest offer and accept the second highest offer or something in order to help get a family into their first home. But realistically, we could only afford to do that if there wasn't too much difference between the figures or anything. So the real estate agent gave us all these offers and told us all the stories behind all the offers, which was his favourite part of the whole job, and the highest offer was $432,000. And he said, look, I've got to be honest though, as your agent, I think this one we could actually get up a wee bit higher in it. I wouldn't be doing my job properly if we didn't at least try. So with that, he steps outside and rings up these people on his cell phone. He comes back inside about 2 or 3 minutes later, and he says they've upped their offer slightly. They can go up to $435,000, and they're happy to do that. And so we said to the real estate agent, well, you said that you love the part about stories best about your job, so now we've got a little bit of a story for you. And pulled out my cell phone, and we passed it over so he could read this note that was in the phone. And he read the note, and it says, the offer we accept is for $435,000. And there's a date on the note, and so you can clearly see that note was written 1 week ago, not just today or something like that. He said, how on earth did you know that? And so that gave us a really good opportunity to witness to this agent. And it's really incredible, because you just never ever know when you're going to have opportunities like this to witness to somebody. And another good thing about that is I've actually kept that note in my phone. It's still in my phone to this day, and we bought this house 4 years ago. Now, the reason I've kept that in my phone is in the Bible it talks about how you should hang ribbons with God's messages and things like this around your house. And I suppose messages like that are probably the modern version of that and things. And because the truth is that all of us, we go through good times, we go through bad times. It's part of life. We're always going to have to go through both good and bad times at various different times in our life. And sometimes, when we're going through a hard time, it can be really difficult to feel God's closeness. So if you've kept things like that, kept notes like that of things that have happened during the good times and things, then you can look at them to give yourself a boost, because you realise that actually it doesn't matter what I'm feeling. It doesn't matter if I don't feel close to God. Here is evidence that God is looking out for me and that God wants absolute best for me. There's no doubt He's real. There's no doubt He's looking out for me because this happened at this occasion. So I also encourage people that when stuff like that happens, keep that stuff. Write notes of it or whatever and keep it. So that if you're ever in a bad spot and maybe you're beginning to doubt things, and let's be honest, don't we all occasionally have doubts or something? Then we can look at these things and remind ourselves of what God has done in the past for us. Well, I think that's probably about all I've got to talk about tonight, so I might call this video that now. Hope you all have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever you're at. Thanks. Bye.